So we're very happy that that we can reconvene, and I apologize for being 2 minutes late but we did pretty good. We want to maintain our reputation for relentlessness. So we're going to, in this session, grab our notes. Where am I at? Why'd you take my notes? Oh, they stole my notes. So this session is on community planning and planning boards, and the session objectives are as we have defined for every one of the groups, except here now, trying to make sure that we understand the perspective and the practical lessons learned from this very important perspective. With us, and to start us, is Robert Olshansky, Professor of Urban and Regional Planning, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Speak. That looks like the right thing. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is I want to take a higher level view of how we go about organizing for rebuilding cities after great disasters. Let's see, there we go. So our model of disaster recovery has several elements. I think the really important thing is that many actors are involved in recovery. It takes more than one organization to build a city in the first place, and when you're rebuilding one quickly after a disaster, it's the same thing. There's lots of entities, lots of individuals, organizations, and all those different relationships between them. Actually, I should interject here. I've heard a lot of the reference a lot to the term resilience, and I just want to remind ourselves that, this really relates to the definition of the qualities of a resilient social system, which is a self-organizing, complex, adaptive system that's got, it operates on networks, has distributed decision-making, and all stakeholders are important. And so this many actors model is consistent with that. And as I know Dan Aldridge would certainly say, that obviously having stronger social networks in this system, places that have those will recover more quickly. So we have many actors involved. And what recovery is a complex reality of these many actors seeking resources, and the resources are money and technical assistance primarily. They're starved for information, there's never enough of that, and they're constrained by time. And these are really the basic elements, I think, in thinking about long-term recovery. The actors, resources, information, and the time constraint. And these things have implications for how we design institutions to operate in the recovery environment. Government is just one of the actors. Now, sometimes the press is always focusing on, we're always finding people who say that government is useless and that we really had to do it all by ourselves. And I'll talk about this a little more later. And that is what happens. But government isn't useless. It's just one of the actors, but it is an important one. They have an important role in providing money, technical assistance, and leadership. Information is vital. Obviously, money is vital, and I think that goes without saying. But I think I want to emphasize the important role of information because to the extent that all of these different actors know about each other's actions, then recovery can proceed more effectively. The self-organizing system can work a lot better if information is the blood of the self-organizing system, if you will. And participatory planning is a really important way to do this. And finally, and I'm going to talk a little more about time compression, but I think this is really what makes recovery uniquely different from normal times. All of the things I've said above are really basically operating all the time. Building cities is a very complex task, and it's complex after disasters, but all of the same elements are there. What makes it different in the recovery environment is the compression of time. Okay, so urban planning after disasters. It's got the same goal as urban planning in normal times, to help people to create settlements that are healthy and safe places to live, to provide viable livelihoods, to provide convenient access to all the things that we need, to make sure that we don't disproportionately burden some groups in favor of others, to be environmentally sustainable, and to provide opportunities for residents to enjoy and improve their lives. These are the same things we always do. And also just a reminder, when we're rebuilding after disasters, again, it's just like normal times, we're not just trying to build buildings. We're trying to create communities, and after disasters, we're trying to restore communities and all the things that entails, which includes livelihoods, and in particular, livelihoods and access are things that I think we need to remember. But the difference is, after disasters, urban planning, as everything else we do, occurs under what we call time compression. And it's because all of these things, the buildings, the livelihoods, the places of social interaction, all of those things are gone quickly, and they need to be, similarly, they need to be replaced in a short period of time. And so this post-disaster environment consists of a compression of activities in time and focused in the space of the disaster. And I could talk about this for an hour, but I won't. But just suffice to say that really the whole list of all the things that we know of as the unique challenges of post-disaster recovery all stem from this phenomenon. This is what makes recovery different than normal times. Now, I heard a lot of people this morning talking about response. And really, this is obviously the same qualities of the short-term response period. But when we get into the long-term recovery, we tend to think that it should be just like normal kinds of processes of building. But this time compression continues through that phase. Several implications of this. I'll touch on a couple. One is planning under time compression is impeded by the fog of war, and this makes urban planning after disasters very different than urban planning in normal times. We know that planning is a very positive kind of activity. It provides information to help people to make informed decisions, and it does play this valuable role after disasters. But time compression makes it much more difficult, and that's because actions happen much faster than the information can arrive to support them. I talked about those many actors, but none of them actually has enough information to make decisions, and they don't have enough information about what each other is doing. And the participants lack the time to acquire and comprehend information, to build trust, to consider alternatives, and to feel confident in their decisions. These are the things that normally, when we have planning processes, these things take time, and we allow a lot of time. And as an example, and I see Linda Houston in the room here is well familiar with the Unified New Orleans Plan process. And that was what would normally be a 2 or 3 year planning process compressed into 4 months, really a little less than 4 months. And with the same budget that you would normally do a 2 or 3 year process. But just because you have the budget and you have more planners working on it in a short amount of time, it still doesn't give you time to do all of these things, for the participants to comprehend the information, to build trust, and so on. And so it was handicapped in that way. And I've done, for the same amount of money, we could have done a planning process with 14,000 planners in the Superdome in one day. But I don't think anybody would think that that's really a very effective way to do planning. So the thing is, some things compress in time differently than others is the lesson here. Different activities compress unequally, from financial transactions, construction, creating social capital, institution building. The ones on the bottom there, social capital and institution building, take a long time to do. Financial transactions can compress a little more easily than those, but some financial transactions compress differently than others, and that's why you get these strange feeling why everything is out of whack, out of phase during disaster recovery, and that's because some things are compressing differently than others. And just as an example here, I have, commerce can restart in various ways quickly, but construction can't. So we have retail services operating among the ruins. On the positive side, time compression also offers opportunities for change, so that sudden loss creates opportunities for reorganizing things, and not just facilities, but also services. centralized sewage plants if that's what you needed before, relocation to mitigate against the threat of future disasters, new parks and open spaces, but also opportunities for change can also occur in political institutions and social networks as well. And we've seen a lot of examples of this after disasters. And urban planning, obviously, is a way to help to seize those opportunities. So finally, the last part here is, what does all this mean for, how can we use this information to be smarter about the way that we plan and manage recovery? The first thing is we need to figure out ways to plan faster. We often talk about the trade-off between speed and deliberation, that there's an imperative to rebuild as fast as possible, but also to slow down and be as deliberate as possible. And with the time compression phenomenon, it's hard to slow down. And so one way to address it is to make the deliberation happen faster. We call it broadening the bandwidth of information. So we want to maximize information flows in order to support planning and reconstruction. And three ways we can do that in planning is, one is increasing planning capacity, so we can add personnel. I've described one process which we did that. We can pay for information systems. We can have more public involvement. We can, second way is to decentralize, so you can have more local planning efforts and coordinate and network among them. And another way is to iterate, so you can do some things immediately with limited data, more things later on. You can attack some of the, actually sometimes some of the more complicated places you can set aside and deal with them on a longer term. The last picture there in Kobe shows where they had some areas that were designated as special project areas, and those took extra attention and took longer to do. So that was an example of iteration. You can design new institutions. Bureaucracies can create new organizations that can improve coordination, that will reduce their inefficiencies and compress time. This morning, Dr. Redliner said something about, he said that we need recovery czars. And I think he got that partly right. I don't think we need one czar at the top, in a top-down kind of process. But I think in each level, you can have, you should have somebody trying to, somebody organizing each level of government. But in any event, having these kinds of new sorts of organizations that help to improve coordination, I think, is one important thing to do. And most successful disaster recovery efforts have had something like this. But at the same time, bureaucracies aren't really good enough to handle all of this. And so unlike bureaucratic processes, cooperation among neighbors and community organizations are things that actually can happen more, they can compress more easily. Bureaucracies work slowly, they have a lot of procedures, but cooperation among neighbors and community organizations can happen can be self-organized more easily in compressed time. And as a result, non-governmental organizations always emerge to fill these gaps of coordination and information. The things that bureaucracies can't provide, the NGOs step into those gaps. And again, it's this idea of increasing the bandwidth of information. And really, this is a good thing, and governments need to embrace it. Again, there's some things governments do well and some things that bureaucratic governmental organizations don't do well. And the best thing that governments can do in response to these new NGOs that appear is to support them and to facilitate their development. And finally, all of this has implications for budgeting. And budgets need to account for more than just replacing damaged structures. And we do a loss estimate, we count how many dollars worth of buildings are gone, and that's what we budget for. But you need these additional costs for information, for data, for communication, public involvement, and planning. And if you don't spend those extra costs for doing that, you're going to end up being inefficient. If you just try to do the imperative for speed, I can list you all the different cases where they tried to go too fast and ended up paying the price. It ended up actually taking longer because they didn't put in these extra costs for information, communication, public involvement, and planning. You need to spend money for iteration. No matter what you do, your initial budget's always going to be wrong. So you need to have some extra funding for that. And for contingencies, because of, and again I can go into it, but because of time compression creates a high probability of mistakes. Because of all these things being out of phase, there's a really good chance that some of those things that are out of phase are wrong and need to be fixed later. This is something that I don't think probably any government really wants to budget for, to rebuild what they just paid to rebuild last year. But if you can budget for contingencies, that also will make things go much more successfully. So in summary, time compression means that actions, financial flows, and information all occur in a very short time period, often simultaneously. I think the most important problem in all of this is one that has actions occurring faster than the information needed to support and coordinate them. And this leads to a variety of challenges that are all the things that we know as being characteristic of post-disaster recovery. And finally, both designing institutions and budgets need to reflect that understanding. That's it.
Thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate it. Really, really good. James Schwab, Senior Research Associate of the American Planning Association. Thank you.